How much of an impact can neuroscience have on your performance? Today we'll be interviewing our guest, Tibisay Vera, founder of Sparkling Performance, a neuroscience-based consultancy firm, and also a director of the Academy of Neuroscience and Education. Good friend of mine, Tibisay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ron. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Really exciting about this conversation we're going to have today.
Yes, and a great time to be discussing, performance as a first topic as we close the first quarter of this new year of 2021. How important is neuroscience in the world of performance?
Yes, neuroscience. And I think neuroscience is becoming more and more into the world of everyone, right? And I could actually see we are in a key point, turning point now, where neuroscience is almost on the mouth of every profession somehow, and somehow we've been exposed to the concept of neuroscience. So what I would say is that neuroscience is about human behavior. Neuroscience is about knowing what happened in our brain and how we can best trick our brain to have the desired behavior that we're looking for. I think until not long ago it was a lot about psychology. Now we know that it's not only about psychology, it's not only about changing behaviors. We can actually do something which is more hardwired to our body. It's about, we can play with neurobiology, neurochemistry.
And there's a certain uniqueness to the science behind neuroscience. There are actual evidence-based approach as to how we do what we do, why we do it. And I'm just wondering, in terms of concept we discussed in the past, the brain reward system, how does that influence high performance professionals or financial experts in general? How does it work and why is it important?
Yes, and I think this is the beauty, right, of knowing a little bit more of neuroscience. And as you mentioned, one of the big areas that we have been doing a lot of research during the last 10, 15 years is around the brain reward system. Why? Because this is what it keeps us motivated. This is what it keeps our high performance. I am actually deep diving a lot in research about the brain sweet spots. And we've been researching a lot about a sweet spot of a balance, what we call it, between the brain reward system and the brain threat system. Why is that? Because those two elements and the right balance between that keep us into focus. And as we know, focus is a key element, right, for high performance, I would say. So that is what I would say the main advantage of knowing neuroscience it comes.
It's an interesting point, and particularly in terms of this balance between risk and reward, and one that was proposed from a behavioral finance point of view from a famous gentleman called Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize in this subject. And he also, I think, alluded to the behavioral impact of risk reward, and specifically, I think in the neuroscience world, what are the neurochemicals that get triggered in either extreme?
Yes. So if we think about focus, or the concept of focus, is basically what we say attention minus distraction, right? And each of those two areas of attention and distractions have their own chemistry. So the chemistry that we come within the attention, so let's say if what we need to increase focus is to increase attention, then it comes a big play of the brain reward system, and here it comes dopamine as a main player. So what do I do to increase dopamine? How can I do to have this dopamine flowing? Now, if what I can see the issue I'm having to keep focus high, it's more with the distraction part of the equation. Then we're talking about the threat reward system. And one of the main distractors nowadays is stress. And the main chemistry coming out of stress, as we know, is cortisol, adrenaline. But having said that, there is a really nice chemistry out there that actually help with the performance, which is the noradrenaline, or in American English, norepinephrine. So, and that's why we call it the right balance. Because if we are too much removing all the stress out, as we know, the curve of peak performance could go down because we go into the boring part of it. So we need a bit of noradrenaline. We need a bit of adrenaline to keep up and going, but not too much to keep us distracted.
Yeah.
On the other, Ron,
I was just going to say, what's important about what you say, Tibisay, and again, this was a talking point for us in past conversations. These emotions align with kind of the cycles of life, but then also the cycles of market. And so just to take back the audience, second half of last year, most people made money in the market. If I was just to focus on traders and investors out there. And as we start this new year, there's been new volatility, the trends have changed. And so some traders say to me, hey, Ron, the psychology and behavioral finance and neuroscience of making money is simple. The more money I make, the happier I am. Right? But that doesn't last forever. And from what you're about to say there in terms of the dopamine isn't supposed to be this ongoing, forever, self-feeding state.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Ron, because I think the more dopamine we have, the more feeling of happiness, as you described it, the more feeling of motivation I have. However, it's very interesting if you see it from the pure biology perspective. As we know, and surely most of you probably might have heard about brain plasticity. What is brain plasticity? Is our brain have the capability to change, to actually physically, structurally change. So let's pick up brain plasticity from the perspective of receptors, right? So the more exposed I am to dopamine, my brain will demand more receptors to be able to reuptake all that floating dopamine that I have in the synaptical gaps. And I don't want to go to technicals, right? But our behaviors is the result of neurochemistry floating in a gap, in the synaptical gaps, right? So if I'm flowed of dopamine, and I usually flow of dopamine by taking risk, by working per objective, and most importantly, when we achieve objectives, then a lot of flow of dopamine come out of our brain. More importantly, if suddenly I have a profit out of the stock market, unexpected, huge amount of dopamine it comes, right? This have a lot of implications from brain plasticity because our brain actually changed itself to be able to deal with huge amount of dopamine, which it means now I have a lot of receptors and quickly it will be reuptaken. What happened is after 6 months, the market goes down. And then for a period of time, 2 or 3 months, I don't have so much dopamine anymore because there is no more unexpected reward coming out there. Probably the objective I've been having, I don't achieve them anymore. I don't oversee them. I don't achieve them anymore. And as a result of that, I will start to have less flow of dopamine. The problem is that now I have a lot of receptors in my brain and it will be reuptaken very quickly. So believe it or not, at one point in time, I will feel demotivated when that happens. Why do I feel demotivated? Because I don't have enough dopamine floating in this synaptical gap that we're talking about. And this is key to understand motivation and demotivation. And it's key to also understand how we act after, because if we are not motivated, if we are not flowed of dopamine, then we feel less likely to take risk in the future.
What's your guidance on that point? So what is a best practice? probably a difficult question to ask, whether it's financial investors or traders or just high performance professionals in general, when they're shifting from a real high point where everything is, you know, is great, it's pleasurable, dopamine is flowing, as you say, and maybe overflowing. What happens when we take that, you know, 2-3 steps forward and then that one step back into the loss of what we experience, but then also maybe into the stress mode by definition?
Yeah, and I think that's where it becomes handy to know how our brain works. And what we have researched, and we have been kind of demonstrating, is that the brain seems to work really nice with high level of peaks of neurotransmitters as long as we let it drop. So what I call the peaks and valleys. And this again linking back to the brain sweet spot. So I think if we artificially, if it's not possible naturally in a normal market condition to have these peaks, ups and downs, somehow we artificially should induce those types of behaviors in ourselves. What I meant is, well, let's have a lot of dopamine flowing and overflowing, but let's be aware, like, let's stop. Let's now have probably some endorphins coming on, and let's let some of the dopamine dropping. Talking about the brain reward system, it has two phases and two main neurotransmitters involved. One of them is the anticipation, which is the dopamine, is the risk-taking one. But we know that once we achieve something, it picks up also a different part of the brain reward system, which is called the consummatory part of the brain reward system, which is the at the moment, the pleasure, the celebration, and that is driven by endorphins. So my advice here is, I will ask you to reflect in how much time do I actually spend in the celebration part? If I achieve a goal, how much time do I spend in celebrating that achievement before I get engaged in the next hunting? I think that is the trick. What we tend to do is, yes, we do celebrate, but while we're celebrating, our brain is already engaged in the next hunt that it comes. That is what we should try to trick. And sometimes it's hard, especially within the financial world, because if you don't start hunting, nothing will come next for a while, right? So it is trying as much as possible to play with those peaks and valleys. Let's try to hunt, celebrate the achievement, let drop the hunt, at least for a day, for 2 days. Keeping the celebration, come back and allow these natural peaks to occur.
And in a way, it's the Googleification of the times that we're in, right? I've got my phone here and I might search for something, 3 seconds, I'm on to the next search. So adults do it, children do it automatically now as part of a digitally native generation. If I can take a circle back to what you said about peaks and valleys, Tibi, because it's a really key point here. Tell me about the valleys. The stuff that people don't want to talk about, it's the elephant in the room. And in this new year, 2021, following last year, roller coaster ride, pandemic, lockdown, we're still in an ongoing disruptive environment. I've been doing a lot of work on this concept of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Acronyms aside, tell us about the valleys and what can we do to deal with the lows in order to embrace the highs?
Yes, so we should actually look proactively for the valleys. We need to actually encourage our brain to go into the valleys, lower levels of dopamine in this case. Not for long, it could be 1 day, 2 days, 1 week, if it's proactively induced, or if the market put the opportunity, and I say opportunity for us to go into the valleys, it's what can I do there? What we say, the valleys of dopamine should be compensated with peaks of endorphins, which is a celebration. How do I do that? How do I promote endorphins to come out of our brain? And one of them is celebrations, laughter, a lot of physical exercises. We know that running, especially running with intervals, release a lot of endorphins as well. On the top of that, there is another neurotransmitter very important here, which is called oxytocin. Also, even though oxytocin is not part of the brain reward system, we know that oxytocin has some properties to increase the perception of pleasure. And what we're saying, in the valleys of dopamine, we should allow peaks of oxytocin and peaks of endorphins to occur. Why? Because it changed the perception of the pain of being in the valleys of dopamine. We know endorphins are there to deal with pain, and our brain doesn't differentiate between a physical pain and a psychological pain. That's the reason why we need to help ourselves to float ourselves with oxytocin. Now you will ask me, how can I float myself with oxytocin? Well, oxytocin is this bounding neurotransmitter. So it comes when I feel bounded within a team, when I feel having meaningful connections at home and at work as well.
And just to re-clarify, I mean, with some of the technical words which light up my head when I hear them, because of our common passion and vision for this topic. For those who may be hearing it for the first time, I mean, if we could go through the list of terminologies. So dopamine, cortisol, and the others that we just mentioned just now, what would be a kind of a short but clear way to recall each of these, and also what their functions are?
Yes. So what I would say, dopamine, it's about excitement, anticipation. Second one, endorphins. It's about celebration, pleasure. Third one, oxytocin, is about bounding. Dopamine and endorphins are part of the brain reward system. And all that is, as we say, let's put it back as we started, within focus, all that helps the attention. So those three. Now, there are two more, adrenaline and non-adrenaline. They are part of the threat system. They are the one that we need to put in the equation of attention minus distraction. So I think for now, if I leave you with 5, dopamine, endorphin, and oxytocin for attention and reward, and I leave you with adrenaline and non-adrenaline for the threat. Will that help?
That helps a lot, and I think we'll get great response in terms of the tech knowledge, but then also the insights from that. One of the sweet spots for me to say is this whole idea of oxytocin, because a lot of the professionals I speak with, first they know about dopamine, they know about dopamine, they know about cortisol. Cortisol, the doctor in the regular checkup says your cortisol levels are too high, you need to drop down. So it becomes hardwired into their head. Dopamine, because that's the happy chemical when they go to the gym or when they're achieving things or making money in the markets, and cortisol for the stress-related issues that we know. But oxytocin is such an unknown to the mainstream, and yet so important. And for me, it was quite an aha moment when I first learned about oxytocin. Originally, I think from yourself, through the work we did at A&E. My question is, what is the function of oxytocin? I mean, I remember you mentioned trust, love. It's other areas in life that might not be so exclusive to the bottom line transaction of achieving a result or a goal. It's more than that.
Yes, definitely. I mean, from pure evolutionary perspective, oxytocin comes for caring. Is the one that the way that we release the most oxytocin is for breastfeeding. It comes from bonding, and it's coming there to make sure we care for the babies. So that is the original. Now, research has demonstrated that there are many acts that actually help us to release oxytocin, and one of them, again, is caring for others, bonding, having common goals, and a sense of belonging. Sense of belonging have a huge impact in levels of oxytocin. Now, what we know is that when we are flowed of oxytocin, our brains change perceptions in terms of trust. So we increase trust. It changes perception of pleasure, and we perceive now more pleasure. And it also has the property to actually physically reduce stress and levels of cortisol. That is the importance of oxytocin. And there are a lot of tricks, and every day is coming more and more research coming about how can I do to promote these neurotransmitters, this peptide, as important of oxytocin.
So going back to the core principles of being human and that life performance balance, one of the brief points I'll make is, of course, the life wheel and this concept of having a complete, more rounded focus in life, maybe in career, maybe with family, maybe with learning, whatever it might be, as maybe one way of finding that sweet spot or that better balance. Tibisay, it's been a wonderful discussion in our opening intro on neuroscience and the impact on performance, but also the brain reward system and all of the different important chemicals that people need to learn. Any final insights you'd like to share with the audience?
Just thank you, Ron, for inviting me here. Yes, if there is something I would like you to remember from this conversation is we work really well with peaks and valleys. Let's take advantage of those valleys and let's actually proactively go there and trying to use, as you say, human being, that now we know there is actually chemistry that justifies that, and that is oxytocin. So yes, that I would end with that point. We're nicely rewired for peaks and valleys. Let's try to trick our brain to actually induce them proactively. And on that note, I will leave you, Ron.
Thank you very much. And for those who would like to follow your work, Tibisay, what's the best recommendations, websites, social media? And I know there's a book in the way as well.
Yes, there is a book on the way. It's going to be called The Brain Sweet Spots. So more to come on that note by the end of the year. And if you want to follow me, sparklingperformance.com, social media, Tibisay, Vera. And if you want to actually deep dive more into the world of neuroscience, please just contact me.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Tibisay.
Thank you, Ron.